So we said yesterday that what he's writing here is that because the people from Lod are described as having gasut ruach, coarse spirit, and they have little Torah, then because of that you shouldn't teach them the secrets of the Torah. And now he explains a little bit more in depth something that is so we said that basically these are people. Coarse spirit means that they don't understand metaphoric language. They can't. They take everything literally. A person who has coarse spirit is a person who takes everything literally. I don't think I said that yesterday. That's basically what it means. And again, that's the introduction. The Rambam, the first part of Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, is all about the Rambam trying to take people out of their coarseness and trying to explain what it means to speak in metaphoric language. And the sages almost constantly talked in this type of language. The prophets entirely. I mean, basically, when we say that the other prophets, except for Moshe Rabbeinu, they speak b'kol, what we mean to say is that they're speaking in metaphors, and you have to unravel them. But he adds now something else. He says, "V'aynu gasei ruach shu ga'ava." So, stam when you say about somebody, "V'zeu she'en shonin Aggadah gasei ruach," right? Page 245, the second paragraph. "V'zeu she'en shonin Aggadah gasei ruach u'mutei Torah." V'aynu gasei ruach. And gasei ruach, to be of course spirit, doesn't just mean to be a person who takes everything literally. It also means, stop, if I would ask somebody, what does it mean to be gas ruach? It says it's bal gaiva. It's a person who has too much pride in himself. But basically what it means is that they're related. That it's not just being a simpleton in the sense that you can't understand a metaphor. It's that you assume that you understand all the levels of what's being said. It could be that you do understand non-literal language, but your pride in your understanding or in your knowledge or whatever it is, and in your intellect, causes you to assume that you already have unraveled all the levels of meaning within what's being said. And you already understand everything that's going on. And it's basically a person who's not willing to entertain the notion that maybe there is a deeper level to reality than what he or she can experience. So apgam de ga'ava, and this is called having pride, gaiva. Megia b'chokhmah b'bina, and it's well known that pride is something that hurts a person's understanding and wisdom. Ki ga'ava gimatria yudke, because the gematria, the numerical value of ga'ava, 3, 1, 6, and 5 is 15. And this is a famous thing. It's interesting that he didn't bring the Arizal on it. In Shar Ruach HaKodesh, almost every yichud there, you could call it, the Arizal discusses this. It's very common. He didn't even bring the source here. I don't know why. So the gava is Yud K, and pride is what hurts a person's wisdom and understanding. The Tzemach Tzedek mentions this, for instance, in the beginning of Derech Mitzvah Secha, where he describes Hamanat, the mitzvah to believe in God, and then he describes Aristotle. And he says that Aristotle's understanding was very good, but he couldn't understand God. Why? Because he took tremendous pride in his understanding. And because he was so prideful, he wasn't able, again, to see the concealed dimension behind what he was studying. So he was a very good philosopher and so on, but that caused him to have a tremendous amount of gaiva, of pride. I wanted to add here something that would incite some people. It's okay, I don't mind. Sometimes it's important to say things that are not so popular. For whatever reason, the people who are challenged by their gender in Israel call themselves ga'ava. That's what they call it, mitzad ga'ava. We should have pride. And when you hear that, as a frum Jew, you go nuts. Because what? That's like the worst thing in the world. How can you have pride? Even if you were 100% the best person in the world, you think you're 100% the best person in the world, to say that you have pride is mamish avi avo satuma. It's like the worst thing, and it skews the mind. So I was thinking about the connection. The Rizal brings this connection many times. It's almost like they chose the name after having read the Rizal. I don't know. It's very interesting. So, there's a thesis that a friend of mine brought forth. There's a lot of reasons why a person's gender would come under question, like their gender identity would be questioned by them. But he brought out a very interesting thesis. To this day, I think it's one of the strongest. And he claimed that to be able to connect with the opposite sex, with the opposite gender, you have to be willing to step out of your skin, because it's very uncomfortable to do it. It's very difficult, because you're connecting with something that's mamish different from you on all accounts, and doesn't understand you, and you don't understand them. So whether it's the woman looking at the man or the man looking at the woman, there's such a gap, a tremendous gap, that's very, very hard to bridge it. There's always a gap between two people, because every two people, we don't, like we said, you can't understand what the other person's thinking. You're not privileged to do the same thing. So it's difficult. But when you add to that the gender gap, where pleasure is understood in a different way, what is important is understood in a different way. It's not just different objects of pleasure. It's not just different. It's a whole different definition. It's like a different category. It's all together. Men look at what women take pleasure in, and they're like, why is that even? Why would you enjoy that? And at every level, these are opposites. So to be able to connect at an emotional and deeper level, you have to get over this idea that I understand fully. You have to be willing to exercise a lot of, call it, I guess, suspend your judgment. You have to suspend a lot of your attempt to understand. And you have to accept that the other side is in its own way logical. It's in its own way it makes sense to them. And it's very difficult. But really, if you just suspend judgment, there's no connection. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to understand. And to understand something that you can't understand, that's exactly the nature of the sod, of the secret dimension of Torah. That you have to understand something that can't be understood. You can't understand Hashem. I mean, basically, it's the biggest gap that there is, right? Right? Kabbalah is like, and Chassidus is like, trying to understand what is completely impossible to understand. And so a person who is willing to engage in this type of learning is a person who's willing to suspend their judgment for a long time. They're willing to really put it off and learn for a long time without understanding what's going on. And that's what happens. That's why a lot of people get turned off by Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is not a difficult book. What the Arizal wrote is not technically difficult. It's very easy, in fact. But it just doesn't mean anything. It's almost like some people listen to their wives, or some women listen to their husbands. They go on, and I don't know what in the world you're talking about. What are you I have to believe that somehow inside for you this makes sense, but I don't know. So I think that's part of what this issue of gaiva is, that when you take when you're too literal in the sense of I already understand everything, then you can't meet what's beyond. You can't meet that which is hidden. You can't give room for it. ולכן אין שונין הגדל שמחוכמה ובינה לגסי רוח הפוגמים בחוכמה ובינה. And because of this, you shouldn't teach Aggadah, Medrash, which is the Torah's secret dimension, to those people who have coarse spirit, who hurt with their gaiva, with their pride, they blemish the wisdom and understanding. V'chen miutei Torah. It also said there that they have little Torah. Hainu mi sheyachol rak et hanovlot chokhmah bilvad le'avin. Meaning, it's only for those. A person who has little Torah is like a person who only understands how the Torah is when it came down into the nigla, but he can't understand. Again, it's the same idea, but it's a little bit better. He just can't understand it. He doesn't have that part of Torah. It's like when somebody says to you, "Don't talk to me about Kabbalah. Don't talk to me about Chassidus. I don't want to hear about it. I don't understand what it means. I know nigla very well." If you say I have a problem understanding, said of Mele, but there's people who made it into like their shita. Where did he get this? Who told you can learn this way, that you can ignore whole categories of Torah? It doesn't make any sense. But that's called somebody has mi'ut Torah. And what is it called? שיכולים רק לקבל את הדבר קטן, the Torah, the only small things. Why? Because דהיינו Avayot Abaye v'Rava, because it says, right, that Abaye and Rava, they were, their discussions, their disputes are described as davar katan in the Gemara. In Sukkah, he brings here the quote in footnote 19. It says like this: davar gadol v'davar katan. Davar gadol ma'aseh merkava, v'davar katan Avayot Abaye v'Rava. Davar gadol, you need gadlus moichin. You need large or major mindedness. You have to be willing, again, to accept that you can't understand it fully, but you can understand what you can understand, and that's called davar gadol, a great thing. It needs meichin de gadlus. But meichin de katnus, right? Just to understand the Abaye and Rava, as far as you'll reach, it'll always be called katnus. It'll always be called something small. Why? Because every person can understand it. It's true. Every person can understand the svara behind what they say. והיינו הנובלות חוכמת תורה, the katnus, כי מיעוט וקטנות הוא עניין אחד, because little bit and small-mindedness are the same thing, and they're called the novelos, the extensions, the droppings of the wisdom of Torah that come down into our world, into Bria. שנובלות חוכמה הוא הנגלה לתורה, הדבר הקטן הבעיות אביי ורבא, ולא אגדה שהוא עצמות חוכמה ובינה. So the נובלות חוכמה is the wisdom as it came down, and it became the revealed tradition of Torah. And that's called the little things, Avayot of Abaye and Rava, the disputes of Abaye and Rava. In any case, I mean, you can also see it that I've never seen that a passage in Zohar would be explained by Nigla. But almost all of the Zohar, or anything in Kabbalah or Chassidus, is an explanation of a passage in Nigla. So you can understand that it's deeper, because you're giving the reasoning behind what's going on in the dispute. So you're giving a deeper interpretation. In that sense, Aggadah or Kabbalah and Chassidus, they're considered greater than the Nigla of Torah. It's not that one part's needed and one part isn't. He's not saying that. He's just saying that if a person does not have the capacity to understand the depth and suspend judgment and be able to sit in the base medrash for a long time without fully understanding what he's learning, then probably you shouldn't teach him. He won't be able to learn this. It'll make mishmash out of it. So now, but this is classic Levi Yitzchak. He says, why do we need both? You could have just told us Gasei Ruach. Why did it also happen? Gasei Ruach and Miutei Torah. So this is classic. Whenever there's something, there's a whole list of adjectives or adverbs or nouns, and so Levi Yitzchak is very famous for saying that each one is needed because each one is talking about something else. So how are they talking about two different things? שאז אין שונים להם אגדה, הלא באחד מהם, או בגסי רוח, או במותי תורה, די שלא ישנו להם אגדה. It would have been enough to just mention one. Meaning, I could think that they're synonymous, that they're the same. It says, no, they're not the same. לזאת יש לפרש, we need to explain that גסי הרוח הוא הלאומת דבינה. To be, of course, spirit, to be prideful, that is mostly the negative side of understanding, of bina. Ki bebina wa nava, because the opposite of gaiva, the opposite of pride, is humility, and humility is in bina. We know. It's a famous thing. Masha asta anava. Sorry, Masha asta yirah akev lesuliyata. Asta anava. No, Masha asta yirah keter lerosha. Asta anava akev lesuliyata. It's a famous statement in the Medrash, and it means basically that the two hays of Hashem's name, they're both feminine oriented. So the first one is Anava, that's the first thing, and the second hay is called Yira. That's famous. So there's a lot of sources for this. He brings a compilation. Morei Or is one of the early compilations. I have it here somewhere, that the Alter Rebbe liked very much, and it was used for many years. It's like it's almost like a dictionary of terms. V'gas ruach shu hefech hanava hu haleuma debina, and to be, of course, spirit. Gas, it's like gas. I guess.
This is grub.
Okay. To be grub is the opposite of being humble, and that's the opposite of understanding. And it's also gas hefech sag debina, and we know that in the four fillings of Hashem's name Havaya, the one that's equal to 63 sag. If you switch the letters around, so that one corresponds to understanding. If you switch the letters around of sag, you get gas. Meaning that this is the opposite, the anti sphira, you could call it, of, or the anti expression of understanding. So that's Gasei Ruach. Miltei Torah, that's talking about Chochmah. Shezehu hanuvlot Chochmah de Torah. You notice that it's not as bad, right? That this is a general idea. We'll explain in a moment why. But to be of course spirit is a lot worse than to be of little Torah. Because the person who has coarse spirit can't learn anything. He won't even be able to learn the nigla. All the more so he won't be able to understand the secrets. But to be of little Torah, settle, so his mind is limited. He can't. It's much better. All this is connected to what happened to the Sfirot in the world of chaos, in the world of Tohu. That when they fell down, so really the ones that shattered and broke were from Das and below, from knowledge and down, those 7. Why 7? Because in the world of Tohu, we mentioned this once, that Netzach and Hod were one. That's why, by the way, that's probably why they were so full of pride. Because Netzach and Hod being one is not. When do you put your 2 feet together? Yeah, but when do you put them together in normal life? When you want to jump.
Put your feet together to jump.
Okay. You bring them together, then you jump, you leap. Now, if you're taking a running start, that's something else. But to put your feet together is like a sign of I don't need to do anything. It's going to happen by itself. You could also think of Superman. If you were flying in the air, you wouldn't have to move your feet separately. So this is a very interesting idea about Chassidus, that when the 2 feet are together, that's like saying that my tmimus and my bitachon are one thing. In other words, to imagine that the fact that I thought it up, it'll already happen. I don't have to do anything. It'll happen by itself. I don't need to I'm gonna get from here to there like a leap, like without any problems. That causes tremendous pride in a person. Who are the most prideful people? The people who've never done anything. Because the moment you have to do something, then you realize that the world's a tough place. And it takes a lot of effort to actually get anything done. Okay, but if you're sitting on your tuchas, and your 2 feet are together, you're not doing anything. So you can imagine, I'll just think of it and it'll become. That's pride. That's like, I can do everything. You can't do everything. When you start trying to do things, you realize, I'm not good at everything. That's one explanation for why the feet are the Netzach and Hodu were together in the world of chaos.
Two friends will never separate.
So they're not Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah and Bina are two friends. Ken. Wow, תודה רבה. תודה רבה.
בבקשה.
תודה.
זה כשר?
So when the 7 sefirot from Dat and down, they completely shattered, they broke. But it says that also Chochmah and Bina were blemished. They had a pagam. But it's known that the pagam in Bina was stronger than the pagam in Chochmah, even though they're together. But Bina was more affected, and Chochmah was less. How does that play out? That in our world, Chochmah is mathematics and Bina is science. It's the exact sciences. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for it. Bina itself is divided always into 3 parts, and that's like physics, chemistry, and biology. There's a lot of reasons to say that's the correspondence. Mathematics, it doesn't reveal Hashem, but it doesn't conceal Him either. You can do whatever you want with it. The numbers can stand for anything. So you can do gematria in Torah, and there you have mathematics that automatically, the moment you started doing it, like the Rebbe says, what's the one example he brings of secular studies that become a mitzvah?
There's a few.
You can do it in a lot of them, but there's one where the moment you start, it's already part of the mitzvah. It's what we're learning now in the Rambam, if you're learning the mathematics in order to sanctify the new moon, to calculate.
It's a mitzvah.
So the mathematics itself is already part of the mitzvah. And these, it's the same exact mathematics that you would be using, calculating how to build a bridge. Doesn't matter. It's the same numbers. Everything is the same. When it comes to science, to the exact sciences, it's not that simple. It's a little bit more complex. Because if you're using, take thermodynamics to heat a mikveh, it's not exactly that the thermodynamics are part of the mitzvah. But to calculate how big the mikveh needs to be, you're going to use mathematics again. To calculate how much water needs to be in the otzar, that you're going to use mathematics. So mathematics is much closer to being part of Torah than the natural sciences are. Because the natural sciences, by the exact sciences, even though they have mathematics in them, they conceal more and more godliness. So therefore, in physics, there's mamish no concealment. It's almost entirely mathematics. So because it's entirely mathematics, it's almost the same thing, except you're just applying it. When you get into chemistry, it's a little bit further. But when you get into biology, it can mamish be treif.
Biology is a problem.
Okay,
You
it becomes.
give me the book from on evolution.
Okay, I have one downstairs. I'll give you. So they blemished, but the blemish in wisdom was much less than the blemish in Bina. And so Bina is gaiva. It's much worse than a person who said it. He doesn't understand the secrets of the Torah. Doesn't understand. What can you do? Doesn't get it. But the person who's a Baal Gaiva, who doesn't understand because he assumes he understands everything, that's much worse. Because the person who doesn't understand, eventually you can teach him. Eventually you'll figure out how to teach him.
First step to understanding is to know you don't know nothing.
Okay. And then if you're willing to to be humble, you can learn. You can understand. So these are called the backside, because the blemish is, the Arizal describes that the blemish was in the backside of Chochmah and Bina. So he says, Hainu Choraim de Chochmah. The Anovlot is the backside of Chochmah. That's what came down. The backside is always where you can't see Hashem fully, and that's what came down. Because again, a person could also be learning Nigle, and he'll learn it like they learn it in university. Why? There's a lot of people who learn that way, and they actually come up with very interesting things. But in the end, you have to ask, is this Torah Hashem? Is this the Torah of Hashem you're learning? Talmud, when you learn it in the university, you may understand the sugya even better than a big Talmud Chacham. You may. Why? Because you have all these tools that the Talmud Chacham doesn't have. The Rav sitting in his room with the stender, and he's learning the Masechet back and forth 10 times a day. He doesn't have the tools that you have. He doesn't have the comparisons. He can't compare the text. He can't see the other variants. He doesn't know the cultural context. He doesn't know this. He doesn't know that. He's missing a lot of things. It's true. So it could be that in the Talmud department in the university, they know more. But the question always remains is, are they learning the Torah of God, or are they just learning a book? What are they learning? Is there any difference between what they're doing and what people do when they learn the Bhagavad Gita? Is there any difference?
The which?
Yeah, whatever, the Hindu texts. There's no big difference. Because you're doing the same thing. You're looking at the seichel in it. You're looking at the understanding in it. But you're not interested in God who's giving it at this moment. That you don't feel. So whenever you listen to a very learned professor in the university who's full of information, wow, it's amazing. But where's Hashem? Most often he's gone. He's not there. He's not there. So that is called the Achoraim. Achoraim is when you can't see Hashem, but there's different levels of Gam. If a person just says, the professor in the University of Talmud will say, look, I understand that there's another way to learn this, where it's a spiritual experience. There's more to it than just what I said. So he's mi'ut. He's called as a mi'ut. By the way, one of the things they never understand, they can't understand the Aggadah. They understand the Nigla very well. When it comes to the Aggadah, they say pashut nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It's like day and night between what they say about the Nigla in the university and what they say about the Aggadah. They can't chop it. They don't get it. It's amazing. I've been following them for years. I read as much as I can from them. I hear their lectures, everything. I know when it's Aggadah, don't waste your time anymore. They are going to say complete nonsense. It's once in a blue moon that somebody says something that's interesting. They can't, because when it comes to Aggadah, they just don't get it. So that's, the Aggadah is called the front side. That's where you see Hashem. That's what it means, front side and back side. So it says like this, and the secret of the intercalation, that's like Aggadah, that's like the secrets of the Torah, that's like the Aggadah. The secrets of intercalation are like the Aggadah, the Medrash, Soda Torah, the secrets of Torah, which comes from the front side of Chokhmah and Bina, of wisdom and understanding. So there's another halacha that he didn't bring until now. Until now, what did he tell us? He said, no, it's the same halacha. I meant there's another Yerushalmi he discusses later. But here, this Yerushalmi says, "En ma'abrinat hashana belod." You can't do the intercalation. You can't add a 13th month in Lod. Why? Because in Lod they're Gasei Ruach. Because in Lod they have Miut Torah. So obviously they were talking about, I guess, the Beis Din there. I don't know. Maybe it's a put down of the Beis Din. That there was a Beis Din, there was a yeshiva there, that whoever wrote the Gemara, or whoever wrote this particular section in the Gemara, he said, this yeshiva doesn't get it. They just don't get it. Maybe there was a university in Lod. I don't know. I don't know. Something like that. But anyway, anyway, the Gemara doesn't want to put anyone down. And the way that Rav Levi Yitzchak is explaining it is that even if there was such a situation, at a certain point in time, the reason was brought down in the Gemara is not to tell us how terrible somebody was. The Gemara didn't bring this because it wants to, because they're the enemies of the Jewish people. They're not the enemies of the Jewish people. A person who doesn't get, who's gas ruach and is miut Torah, he's not an enemy. But what do you need to learn from it? What Levi Yitzchak explains. You need to learn from it why this affects your ability to understand the secrets of the Torah. These two traits of being gas ruach, of being prideful, and of being a person who can't accept that there's anything more than what I know, these types of people, they have no connection. You can't teach them, these two traits if you have them, you have to get rid of them in order to learn Pnimius Torah.
How do you get rid of them?
Work on them. Yeah. And the very fact that somebody is even sitting and learning Pnimius Torah means that he's already not Miut Torah, and he's not Gasuach. Because otherwise, why would he be sitting here? And you know people who are like that, who are unwilling to hear that there's another depth to what is being taught. You know people like that. They're very close-minded.
Many people.
Okay. So, how did I think I even heard this once from Rav Steinsaltz, but I'm not sure where I heard it first. But it's the idea that a person who is against Chassidus is because he doesn't take Chazal seriously. He's not willing to believe that everything that he said has meaning. Today, that it has real meaning now. So, for instance, somebody who says the science in the Talmud is outdated, you don't need to look at it. You can disregard it. It's just wrong. The Rebbe didn't say anything. The Rebbe didn't say anything like there's something that's superfluous or something. He said, even if the science today we understand it differently, there is still meaning in what they said. And he took time to explain. And he said, don't believe for a second that what they described externally, meaning the literal meaning of their words, is all that they meant. They had also a pneumius meaning, just like we're looking at it here. That the people in Lod it has meaning behind it. The people who live in Lod today are not like that. There's a big Chabad community in Lod. There's a big yeshiva in Lod. They're not people like that. So strike it out of the Talmud. We don't care. What? It's around the same place. Yeah, there's Lod Atika. Even you're supposed to. I think they keep Tetvav there. 2 days of Purim. They do 2 days out of Suffolk. So it's not to say something about the people who live there now. Of course it's not. It's outdated. But you still have what to learn from it. Because everything that they said had a deeper meaning also. So somebody who's not willing to accept this deeper meaning, they can't understand the pneumius. They don't get the... So now there's a small section here in Kabbalah. I don't want to go over it, but I was very impressed by it. There's a lot to be said here. Actually, there's something that's related to the parsha. So maybe we'll look at just at what he says here, that he put note 22. So this is about the section we just read.
Yeah.
יסוד העיבור שמגיע בחוכמה ובינה הוא הדרך כמו האגדה. So this guy Dubov who did this, he's a big maven in Likutei Sichos. So it's not directly related, but it's related. And he brought a sicha here from volume 10, the second sicha of Vayechi. And there, the Rebbe talks about what Yaakov said before he passed away. He said, "He'asfu ve'agida etchem et asher yikre etchem be'acharit ha'yamim." Come together, he said to his sons, and I will tell you what will happen to you at the end of days. And the Rebbe brings, why did he say that? Why is it ve'agida lechem? Why is it not ve'omar alechem? Why is it not adaber alechem? Why specifically Aggadah? So there's 3 different synonyms in Hebrew for saying something. Amar, Diber, Higid. What's the difference between them? So usually when you hear Higid, you hear that it's more stark. It's stronger. Because it sounds like Gidim. It's like, and we learn that from Kotomar le Beit Yaakov, V'taged livnei Yisrael. So you shall say, softly, emol to women, and strongly, Taged levet Yisrael is to say to the men much more vehemently.
Tell him all the punishments.
Okay. So but that misses dibur in the middle. So the Rebbe builds a understanding there that these three levels, which are dibur, amira, and haggadah, they correspond to right here. Aggadah is again. Okay. So he says that dibur is in the heart, and amira is in the moichin, and haggadah is the etzim. Why is dibur in the heart? Because the heart and the mouth are considered to be that you speak through the. So dibur, just to speak with dalet bet reish, that's like just speaking, and that's from the heart. Amira is more from the mind. It's a revelation of intellect. Why would you say? Because in the Arizal, Amal is Or Maim Rakia. It starts in the light of the mind, and it becomes in the end the words that come out of the mouth. But it starts in the head. But Higid, he says, is Atzmus. That's why he said V'Agida Etchem. And that's why on Passover night we call it the Haggadah. Because we have a chance once a year to speak between each other, especially in terms of education. The educational night is to speak, and that's the topic of our Parsha, right? Because we said in this week's Parsha we read what you're supposed to say to 3 of the 4 sons. It's all in this week's Parsha, in these last 2 chapters of Parshas Bo. Mm-hmm. So this is all Haggadah. This is all a chance to speak from the essence. It's not just intellect, and it's not just feeling. It's mamash the essence. And so it's very interesting thing that he brought this sicha here. So I think that we covered most of it. So there's more Kabbalah here that we didn't get into, but.